Most gardeners walk into a nursery, pick up a perennial in a small plastic pot, and pay $12 to $20 for something that costs the grower pennies to produce. That's not an accident. That's the business model. 13 perennials on this list are some of the easiest plants in the entire gardening world to multiply for free, and most people never learn how because the nursery has zero incentive to tell you. I'm walking you through all 13, exactly how to get them without spending another dollar, and the specific technique that works for each one. Before we start, tell me in the comments if you've ever propagated a plant for free before, or if this is completely new territory for you. Number 1 is Hosta. If you already own one mature Hosta, you technically already own 10 more, you just haven't split it apart yet. Division is the technique here, and it could not be simpler. In early spring, before the leaves fully unfurl, dig up the entire clump and you'll see it's actually made of several individual crowns bundled together at the root. Pull or cut those crowns apart, each one with its own roots attached, and replant them anywhere you want more Hosta. A single 5-year-old clump can often be split into 6 to 10 new plants in one afternoon. It's hardy in zones 3 through 9, thrives in shade where almost nothing else performs, and the divided sections establish so fast you'll barely see a size difference between the original and the new plants by the following season. Named varieties like Francis Williams and Blue Angel divide exactly the same way as the plain green types, so don't be afraid to split an expensive variety once it's established. One thing worth knowing, don't divide in the heat of summer. The stress combined with high temperatures kills a noticeable percentage of transplants that would have survived fine in cooler weather. Number 2 is Daylily. This is arguably the single easiest perennial in existence to propagate for free, and the reason most gardeners have dozens of them lining a fence is because one plant becomes many with almost no effort. Daylilies form dense clumps of individual fans, each one a complete plant with its own root system. Every 3 to 4 years, dig the clump, separate the fans by hand, and replant each one 12 to 18 inches apart. You'll get anywhere from 5 to 20 new plants depending on how established the original clump was. Hardy in zones 3 through 9, and daylilies are so forgiving of this process that you can technically divide them almost any time the ground isn't frozen, though spring and fall give the best results. Stella de Oro is the variety most commonly found already growing in established yards, which makes it the easiest one to source for free from a neighbor who's had a bed established for years. Here's the detail most people miss: if you're gifted a division from someone else's yard, replant it the same day if possible. Daylily roots dry out and lose vigor fast once they're out of the ground. Number 3 is coneflower, or echinacea, and the free propagation method here is one most gardeners have never heard of: seed collection directly off your own plants. Let a handful of spent flower heads dry completely on the plant instead of deadheading them. Once the center cone turns dark brown and brittle, the seeds inside are ready. Rub the cone between your fingers over a container and the seeds fall right out. Direct sow them in fall. They actually need a cold winter period to germinate properly, and by the following summer you'll have new plants blooming. Hardy in zones 3 through 9. This works exceptionally well with the straight species types, less reliably with patented hybrid varieties, since many of those are sterile or won't grow true from seed. If you want a guaranteed match to a specific hybrid, root division in early spring works instead, just like Hosta. One thing worth knowing: birds will absolutely raid those seed heads if you leave them standing too long into winter, so collect what you want for propagation before the goldfinches get to it. Number 4 is Black-Eyed Susan, and like coneflower, this one propagates freely from seed with almost no effort at all. Leave the seed heads standing through fall, and by winter they are loaded with viable seed that will often self-sow right where they stand without you doing anything. If you want to control where the new plants end up instead of leaving it to chance, collect the dried seed heads in late fall, crush them gently over a paper bag, and scatter the seed exactly where you want new plants the following spring. Hardy in zones 3 through 9. Goldstem is the variety most commonly available, and it self-seeds reliably true to type, which isn't always guaranteed with hybrid perennials. Established clumps can also be divided every 2 to 3 years in early spring for an even faster multiplication method if you don't want to wait for seed to germinate. The golden tip here: thin the seedlings that come up on their own the following spring rather than letting them all fight for space, and you'll get noticeably stronger plants by midsummer. Now here's something worth knowing before we go further. Number 9 on this list is a plant most gardeners pay full nursery price for every single time, when it's actually one of the fastest and easiest perennials on this entire list to multiply for free using a single cutting from a stem you'd normally throw away. I'll get to it, but first, tell me honestly, have you ever taken a cutting from a plant and had it actually root successfully, or has that always felt intimidating? Number 5 is sedum, specifically the taller autumn joy type varieties. This one propagates from stem cuttings so easily it almost feels like cheating. In early summer, snip a 4 to 6 inch piece from a healthy stem, strip the lower leaves, and simply stick the cut end into moist potting soil. No rooting hormone required, though it speeds things up slightly. Within 2 to 3 weeks, roots form, and by fall you have an independent plant ready to go in the ground. Hardy in zones 3 through 9, and sedum is drought-tolerant enough that even a slightly neglected cutting has a strong chance of surviving. Autumn Joy remains the most widely available variety, and it roots from cuttings just as reliably as the newer named cultivars. One detail worth remembering: let the cut end callus over for a few hours before sticking it in soil. It reduces the chance of the cutting rotting before it has a chance to root. Number 6 is Siberian iris, and division is the method here, though the technique is slightly different from Hosta or Daylily because the roots are rhizomes rather than fibrous clumps. Every 3 to 4 years, dig the clump in late summer after flowering has finished, and you'll find a tangle of rhizomes just under the soil surface. Cut them apart with a clean knife, making sure each division has at least a few healthy roots and one growing point attached. Replant immediately at the same depth they were growing before. Hardy in zones 3 through 9, and Siberian iris tolerates wetter soil than almost anything else on this list, making it one of the better choices for a low spot in the yard where other divisions might struggle. Caesar's brother is the classic deep purple variety most commonly found already established in older gardens, which again makes it an easy one to source for free from someone who's had a bed going for years. The part almost nobody mentions: don't replant divisions too deep. Rhizomes that end up buried more than an inch below the surface often fail to bloom the following year even though the plant survives. Number 7 is ornamental grass, specifically feather reed grass and similar clumping types. These divide in early spring exactly like Hosta, dig the entire root mass, and you'll often need a saw or a sharp spade to cut through the dense root structure since grass clumps get considerably tougher than perennial flower clumps over time. Split into sections, each with visible growing points, and replant immediately. Hardy in zones 4 through 9 depending on variety. Carl Foster is the most widely planted feather reed grass in American yards, and it's one of the easier grasses to divide because the root mass, while dense, isn't quite as fibrous as some of the larger switchgrass varieties. The golden fact here: divide grasses before new growth exceeds a few inches in spring. Wait too long and the transplant shock noticeably slows the plant's performance for that entire season. Number 8 is bee balm, and this one spreads so aggressively on its own that free propagation almost isn't a choice, it's something you'll eventually be forced to deal with. Bee balm spreads by underground runners, and every spring you'll find new shoots emerging several inches to a foot away from the original planting. Simply dig up those new shoots, which already have their own root system attached, and transplant them wherever you want more color. Hardy in zones 3 through 9. Jacob Klein is the red flowering variety bred specifically for mildew resistance, and it spreads just as readily as the older types. One thing worth knowing: if you don't want bee balm taking over a bed, either plant it in a bottomless container sunk into the ground to contain the runners, or simply commit to digging out the new shoots every spring and giving them away or replanting them elsewhere. Number 9 is lavender, and this is the one most gardeners assume requires buying a new plant every single time, when a single softwood cutting taken at the right moment roots with surprising reliability. In late spring or early summer, snip a 4 to 6 inch piece of new, still flexible growth, strip the lower 2/3 of leaves, and place the cut end into a well-draining mix of sand and potting soil. Keep it consistently moist but never soggy, and roots typically form within 4 to 6 weeks. Hardy in zones 5 through 9. This method works with virtually every common lavender variety sold at nurseries, since lavender doesn't reliably grow true from seed the way some perennials do. Cuttings are actually the more dependable free method here, not a fallback option. The detail most people skip: take multiple cuttings at once. Even under good conditions, not every cutting roots successfully, and starting 5 to 6 gives you realistic odds of ending up with 2 or 3 strong new plants. Number 10 is hardy geranium, the true perennial cranesbill type, and division is remarkably forgiving here compared to most perennials on this list. Nearly any time from early spring through early fall, you can dig up a section of an established clump, and because hardy geranium roots so readily from even small pieces, you don't need to be as precise about root mass per division as you do with something like iris. Hardy in zones 4 through 8. Roseanne is the most widely planted variety, and divisions from it establish and bloom again the same season more often than not, which isn't typical for most divided perennials. One tip worth remembering: water divisions heavily for the first 2 weeks after transplanting regardless of the season you split them in. That single habit is what determines whether a division thrives or simply limps along. Quick honest question before we continue. Out of everything covered so far, which method sounds the most doable to you: division, seed collection, or cuttings? Tell me in the comments, because it tells me exactly which technique to build a dedicated deep dive video around next. Number 11 is yarrow, and this one gives you 2 free propagation methods simultaneously, which makes it one of the most efficient plants on this entire list to multiply. Established clumps divide easily in spring using the same method as hosta, and yarrow also self-seeds readily if you leave some flower heads standing through fall instead of deadheading everything. Hardy in zones 3 through 9, and it tolerates poor soil and neglect well enough that transplants and seedlings both establish with minimal babying. The straight species and most common cultivars grow reliably true from seed, unlike a lot of hybridized perennials on the market. The golden tip here: if you're dividing an established clump, do it every 2 to 3 years regardless of whether you want more plants, because yarrow left undivided for too long tends to die out in the center of the clump, leaving a gap that new divisions actually prevent. Number 12 is aster, and the free method here is division combined with a technique most gardeners never think to try: softwood cuttings taken in late spring before flower buds form. Both methods work reliably. Division follows the same early spring process as most perennials on this list: dig, split, replant. Cuttings taken from new spring growth root within 3 to 4 weeks in moist potting soil, giving you a faster path to multiple plants than waiting for an established clump to be large enough to divide. Hardy in zones 3 through 8. Purple dome is a compact variety that divides especially well because it doesn't sprawl the way some taller aster varieties do, which makes locating clean divisions considerably easier. One detail worth knowing: asters propagated from cuttings taken this spring will often still bloom that same fall, which isn't something you can count on with most propagation methods on this list. Number 13 is peony, and I want to be honest with you about this one before you get excited. It's the slowest method on this entire list, but it's also completely free, and a well-divided peony root can outlive the person who planted it. Division happens in fall, after the foliage has died back. Dig around the entire root mass carefully. Peony roots are thick, fleshy, and genuinely difficult to damage accidentally. Each division needs 3 to 5 eyes, the small reddish buds visible on the crown, to have a strong chance of establishing well. Hardy in zones 3 through 8. The honest trade-off here, a newly divided peony often takes 2 to 3 years before it blooms with any real presence, which is longer than every other plant on this list. But once established, that division will keep coming back and expanding for decades with essentially no ongoing care. Sarah Bernhardt is the most widely available variety, and it divides using this exact same process. The part almost nobody tells you: don't get discouraged if a new division doesn't flower the first year or two. That's completely normal, and rushing to fertilize heavily to force faster blooms usually does more harm than good. That's all 13. Every one of them proving the same point, that most of what you're paying full nursery price for is sitting in your own yard or a neighbor's, waiting to be split, cut, or collected for free. If any of these change how you build out your beds this year, or you've already been propagating one of these without realizing there was a name for what you were doing, tell me which one in the comments. And if this just saved you real money at the nursery this season, that's exactly why subscribing matters. The next video breaks down which of these free propagation methods actually work on plants everyone assumes you have to buy new every single year.